good evening to you viewers. Welcome to this edition of the Host Estate. I am your host today, Agatha Taire, and I am sitting in these big shoes, in the big chair of Charles Mwangu Shampaji. And today we are discussing stories that have dominated the week, and particularly the story of Makerere University, which has not just dominated last week, but has dominated the last couple of weeks, coming to 14 days now. We will also be discussing the story of journalists and the running battles with the police and how they have retaliated or responded to the brutal treatment that they have suffered at the hands of the police while covering the Makerere story. Also, tonight we will be discussing the story of the politics of the ghetto. President Museveni has been hunting from the ghetto and picking butchermen, picking people that most of us have not even heard of. What's her name? Full Figure. Yes, to add them on Kusasira and Bebekula and the rest. So we'll be looking at that and what Museveni hopes to achieve by doing that. And to discuss with us all these stories and more today, we have three gentlemen. I'll start from my left. We have Muchibi Elias Aserunjoji. Muchibi is the managing editor weekend at the Daily Monitor. But you're good to have you here, Muchibi.
Thank you so much.
We have Kenneth Rukwago Anderson. Kenneth is the producer at Radio 1. Welcome to the show, Kenneth.
Thank you for inviting me.
And lastly, we have Yusuf Serunkuma. Yusuf is a columnist and a scholar. He's a columnist with The Observer. Very nice to have you, Yusuf.
Thank you.
And I'm going to start with you, Yusuf. Yusuf is almost a resident of Makerere University.
Not almost. I am actually a resident of Makerere University.
Having been there for the last 15 years, working there, studying there, and all. And the question we would like Yusuf to help us answer today is, we have seen very many strikes in Makerere. We cannot count them. In fact, strike and Makerere are synonymous now. But this strike we have seen worse. The tendencies that we haven't seen before, the raiding of the halls that was last seen in the Amin era that we were told we were liberated from. But the question today, and that was discussed last week on this show, but today we ask ourselves, how do you see this ending? You have on one side the students that don't want to budge, because even when the Makerere management announced that the increment was taken off the functional fees, that it will only stay on the fees, the tuition, the students still refused to budge and are continuing with the strike and ignoring all the calls to call off the strike. How do you think this will end?
You said that of the so many strikes that demonstrates that we've seen at Makerere against so many things, this is the worst. I don't think this is the worst. If it were a movie, I think we are the opening credits. It is just beginning. We are likely to see more moving between staff and faculty and students, that more strikes are going to happen. And as you've said, we've had so many, and I think you can locate them in 1990s. We've had so many beginning 1990s over so many things, over stipends, over boom, over nature of food given in the halls of residence, over the classes themselves, over so many other things that have come up, over faculty, salaries. So it's not yet to end. But I want to tell you a story. I was lucky this week. This week I was in Arua and I had opportunity to sit down with, he's a columnist of the Daily Monitor, Ambassador Harold Achema, who was at Makerere in the 1960s. And he was nostalgic about those days. And I was awestruck by how beautiful those days were. He said to me that he was in Makerere between 1960, 67 and 69. But he said the entire time he was at Makerere, he never saw a soldier or a police officer enter Makerere University even once. He never. And he said, during those days, Makerere was highly respected. If you are a politician in Kampala and your life was in danger, the place you would run to, instead of running to the American embassy, you'd run to Makerere. So it was such a fortified place. The moment you showed your ID as a student at Makerere University, that was enough to give you security, protect you from...
So what has changed?
So, well, 1990, we will always go back 19, but I want to capture this nostalgia, that this nostalgia has not really gone away, that it was a public university then. Then it was University of East Africa, and then it became Makerere University. But being a public university, the idea of being a public university has not gone away. So we still think about Makerere University as a public university, even after 1990, the 90s, when it allowed fees-paying students to come into the university. So what has changed is that it now embodies this really sort of diametric hue. It is both a private and a public university. But the idea of being a public university reigns higher in the minds of whoever visits Makerere over the private thing. So students who walk into this university are fully aware that we're going to a university which is a government university. Yes. By extension, you expect to have a service which is for free. So even if you're paying, the mindset you have is that I am sharing costs with government. So you don't understand where this process of cost sharing, the costs you're sharing are continuously going up. All right, you're in a public university, which is you're a private fees-paying student. At a public university, ideally you're sharing costs to the government. But when they keep going up, it worries. And as long as we still have this sort of a dynamic, public and private, I don't see anything changing. Like I said, if it's a movie, it's at the opening credits. Because, you know, Makerere is looking for 4.5 billion at the end of the 5-year period. Now, this is small money compared to the amount of money that is floating around in this country. It's really small. But if what Ambassador Chema showed me is that there was so much political will to keep Makerere as a thriving private institution. The facilities, rather public institution, the facilities, the money coming to the university was huge. Mulago was a thriving, first world university medical facility in the region, in Africa, put together. So, you know, the moment this political will is lost to fund a public university, that's the danger we're saying, and I don't see anything changing again.
But Yusuf, we don't think the problem of Makerere, us as journalists and people that are a little familiar with the issues, we do not think it's the money. Makerere's budget is about 315 billion per year. And it is claimed that the government gives them over 70% of that budget, about 230 or 225 billion. And the money they get from students, private students in Makerere, could be well over 100 billion. So how does that become Makerere's biggest problem? That we have seen strikes year in, year out, or month in, month out. What is the problem money really? Is it a financial?
The 70% is support to salaries. I don't even know where you get the figures, the 270 billion coming from the government of Uganda.
Not 270, I think 225?
Because
yes.
Makerere entirely generates 90 billion, which is small. Even the 320 billion budget that they have is still a deficit budget. It's a budget which has been heavily cut so that they can meet the basic demands of running a university. The problem is principally funding. And as you go back to this conversation between government and Makerere, it's been going on for a long time. And Makerere has always considered raising tuition as ways of raising money. Every time Makerere goes to government to say, hey, can you increase the budget you're giving to us? Because we're running really expensive programs, by the way. The number is huge, and the tuition we're charging from the students is also small. Give us more money. The government response is increase taxes, increase tuition. And the last two reports that were two visitation committees, the Omaso report and the Rendere report, all of them recommended that if government generate money, university generate money, among other things, they have to raise tuition by very, very difficult percentages. Some recommending 95%, some recommending 75%. Now, if you're going to have this is like twice the money that students are paying. Now, if you're going to do that to a public university, and you've seen these comparisons flying around with private universities. If you're going to do that to have a 100% rise in a public university, that's recipe for disaster. And as you've seen, we're just raising 15%, and students are protesting it. And by the way, make no mistake, I hope I sound clear on this one, the students are right to protest this. Because when you go into Makerere University, you're walking into a public university where prices shouldn't be determined in the marketplace.
Let me come to you, Elias. I see you itching to and writing notes. As Yusuf is explaining, you'd expect that a university that is a public university, the 90 billion it generates from students is a bonus, is a supplement. It supplements the money that the government gives it. How then can budget difficulties be the biggest problem that the university has contended with for the last how many years?
So many.
Thank you. I don't know whether the 90 billion should be something to just supplement, because once you take in a student, you certainly have to look after them, and look after them very well. But I don't understand whether the problem is money. But even if it were, it is just a reflection of what's happening almost all over the place. If you go, KCCA was very poorly funded. They said that before the change over to KCCA, and I think it is now back. So it is, I mean, you can talk about any ministry, any department, whatever, and you're going to be talking about money. I don't think that is the problem. But now, looking at what is happening at Makerere, this strike has gone on now for 2 weeks. Maybe it will go on for longer. That hasn't happened in a very long time. And I get surprised, what is the state trying to do with this? Because there was that violence meted on students that was frozen. Now it is a bit there, and the battles are being fought from outside the university. I wonder what metal are the students' leaders made of? Because I credit President Museveni for one thing, he can manage to break up things. They can very easily divide the students. We have seen with protests, if you can talk about walk to work and go back to how he said he broke it up. You get politicians who parade themselves as people who are against the government, and you're working for him to break it up. I'd imagine that this strike would be much easier to diffuse, even without beating up anybody. The Guild Council just comes, and now more than half of it say, we stop, and they stop. So I am just wondering whether they are just using this strike, maybe let it go on for a bit longer, so then maybe you may use it as a test case to see what happens if you have had FDC, especially Dr. Besigye talking about protests that might come. Even if those don't come, we are going into an election period where you expect disputes and whatever. Are they using this to study what they could, I don't know.
Yes, thank you, Mchimi. Kenneth, the question I think we want to our viewers to be explained about is, why did we come to this, or how did it come to you having a public university that has become a battlefield, that you've seen students. Last night here there was a story of a student with physical disability that was beaten up by police and is in difficulty and ill. So how did we get to this point?
Well, first of all, the situation at Makerere mirrors the governance situation in our country. First of all, I have a feeling, basing on what I have seen, that actually the people who are in charge at Makerere, the people who are in the management, are actually not the ones who are calling the shots. And one of the reasons I think so is that it took President Museveni to call the chairperson of the council and the guild president to actually initiate a meeting after the strike had started. Yet one would think that that would be in the playbook, something that you would think about the moment you even feel the tremors that there's something that is going to take place. So I actually think there are people outside the university who are actually calling the shots and saying this is really what must happen. And areas here actually
calling the shots on what side? On the
calling all the
side?
shots on how the affairs of the university should be conducted, including dealing with issues like disagreements may be brought up by students. And as I was saying, areas here was just hinting on it, that what could be probably the reason why we have seen the heavy-handedness in a manner in which the response has taken place. And I'm thinking, I think it's a signal that probably as we get closer to the next elections, the people who are in charge do not want to see any semblance of, if I may use a Swahili word, kavuyo, confusion around, or a situation that gives maybe those that have been calling for peaceful protests and things of that nature to actually find an entry point to actually pick it up. That's why you had accusations that came that the students had been infiltrated by politicians, and that the politicians were the ones were actually funding, that there's a mobile money dealer who has actually been sending money to students, asking them to go ahead and protest. So the people who are actually commanding the affairs in the university are outside, and they seem to be dealing with certain people inside the management. That's why you had some names of people working in administration actually featuring prominent in the statements that were released by the students. And of course, the other issue actually to discuss is whether decisions that are made by a council, a previous council, can be challenged by the next set of leaders that come up, because that seems to be the issue. Because while the university management is saying the decision of the 15% was embraced by the previous leadership of the students, the current students are saying this is not acceptable. And the latest I'm seeing that they have called an extraordinary assembly, which is going to take place tomorrow, and they are saying they are going to do it at the Freedom Square, and I really don't think they will be allowed to actually go there, so that they can take a decision. So it's a broader management situation, and in some of the issues the students have talked about, the lack of accountability at the university. You've been talking about the monies that the university receives, probably the even funding that comes from outside. Are the resources actually being put to good use? Because we have had certain things about how resources are mismanaged at the country. So it's a bigger management problem, and the saddest part is that it comes out at our highest institution of learning, Makerere University.
If you just let me, I wanted again to say something, and he's hinting on it, about what I call the systematic destruction of the spirit of Makerere, because this strike has gone on for 2 weeks. But I tell you, from a journalist perspective, it is very difficult to get even professors at Makerere to comment about it freely.
Exactly.
They are very scared, and that's not how it was when I started out as a journalist around 2005-06. It was already going down, but you could very easily go and say, I need 10 professors to talk about this matter of national importance. It could be politics, it could be anything, and they would speak, in my opinion, freely about it. These days, you'll be lucky to get 4 or 3. So this is going on, and so I think that just goes to demonstrate what has been happening at Makerere. It is not just the money you are talking about. If people want to strike, there would be no business at Makerere at all. You just need to enter one hall of residence, because here they are talking about those who are privately sponsored. But the government gives you a scholarship. You go and you are crammed in a room built in the 1960s, whatever.
Okay. We need to take a short commercial break. When we return, before we take a commercial break, I think we should finish the Makerere issue. Yusuf, we have the assembly coming up tomorrow.
I want to pick something that Elias and Anderson said about the strikes being some sort of an experiment for the opposition politics, like playing it out inside the university. That sounds like they're in agreement with the First Lady, who said the other day that she was aware, and I mean, Nang also said the same thing. Yes. I think that's largely speculative. You cannot say that.
Is that what Elias said?
That's how I understood him. Maybe he says something, but that's how I understood him.
I think it is flipped.
And Anderson echoed it when he said that, you know, people orchestrating events in Makerere outside the university. I may agree to a point if the president is orchestrating things, calling up people, initiating meetings.
Actually, I'm not saying that.
But then you said.
I'm not saying that the people who are pushing the students to strike are the ones that are outside the university. I'm saying the people who are determining the response of the management.
From what I guess is about the independence of the
university. The independence of the university. Management to make decisions.
Yes.
It's not there.
But also the argument is floated. Maybe now you've backtracked from it, but the argument
I'm not backtracking.
Opposition.
You
I
was
writing. You said
you misunderstood.
Best just trying to play this thing out.
Kenneth, can you let
we shouldn't take agents away from the students. we cannot reduce students to passing hireable gangs to fight somebody else's battles, right? We need to appreciate the students have agency in these matters, and the contention over tuition, I think, is a valid contention. Now we're struggling with two things here, right? The one of contention of the school over tuition, and the response from government.
Yes,
now, the response from government has been said over and over again is that government is not aware. And I think the most convincing explanation for me is the idea that if any riot started, if any protest started from anywhere, can I finish this first?
These to clarify their points, because I didn't understand them to be supporting the First Lady's.
That's how I sort of understood them, and I was awestruck. I'm like, really? You saying this kind of? Anyhow, so what is convincing to me is why this sort of response, why this overwhelming display of violence on the part of government. The idea is this, and I said this last time we were here on the show, that this government understands that the only way it can be thoroughly threatened, convincingly threatened, is in the idea of student protests. And student protests can start as small things concerned about education, but they may end in something more serious than just education. And I think because the government is aware of this worry and is aware of the history of student protests across the world, this is why you're going to see this sort of reaction. And I said last time also, the reaction we see protest against people protesting rent increments in Kampala is the same as the response we are seeing from government to students at Makerere.
Okay, that Kenneth.
Well, I think Yusuf did understand my point. Yusuf, my submission was that the people who are directing how management is responding to the issues of the students are basically outside the university. In other words, the current management of the university lacks the independence to determine. In fact, I began by giving you an example that it took the president to call the guild president and the chairperson of the council to initiate a meeting. And when I talked about you brought in the name of Dr. Besigye, I was actually telling you that the manner in which the security forces responded is to send a signal to whoever will try probably to use, to bring up confusion, to bring up protests, the manner in which they will respond to them, because we are all appalled by the manner in which they have handled the Makerere situation, going to the halls of residence and unabated. We saw all the violence and statements were issued, but they continue to do the very thing. So I'm not saying that whatever was happening at the university or the cause of the students is uncalled for. I'm actually saying the management at Makerere would have handled this situation better, but they didn't, because there are people outside who are actually pushing them to take a hardline position.
Okay, we get that point, Kenneth. I thought you wouldn't be misunderstood to be, and Elias also wants to clarify.
I have a few minutes to just
You cannot afford to be seen to be associating yourself with the comments of people of corrupting the students. And so, Mchibi, please.
No, the important point I wanted to make was you are talking about. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from the students. But what I'm saying is, once this started, there is even a possibility that it was being fueled even by the state. The state has capacity to fuel something, and then it is seen to be fighting it, just to demonstrate that if this is done anywhere, this is how we will handle it. That's the simple point I want to make.
Okay, let's go for a short commercial break. When we come back, we are going to be talking about how the police has reacted to journalists covering that Makerere story. We will be back. Welcome back from the break, and we are still on the question of Makerere. It is 14 days to the final exams of the semester in Makerere now, and instead of students preparing, they are in running battles, and you have 2,000 police officers now guarding Makerere, which one of the professors was commenting about and saying, how do you expect students to study in that kind of environment? And we are seeing indications that it is not about to end. As we know, tomorrow the students plan an assembly. The management also says it will quell that assembly and is insisting that classes resume as normal. So we are asking again, how is this going to end, and how can the situation at Makerere be returned to normalcy? Back to you, Yusuf.
Like it's difficult to put a finger at how it is going to end. But, you know, as my panelists have just mentioned, the one calling the shots will call all of them and demand that they resume progress. It's highly likely that, you know, the Web7 has like run this country for quite a long time. He lets things play out so that he sees where they're going to end before he moves in like really decisively. I argued one time that as the opposition political party was struggling to get a single candidate to stand against him, I argued that it won't be surprised if Museveni called them one time to say, hey, you guys have to sit down and agree and have a single candidate against me. Because, you know, he has the means to do that. And I think the only way it's going to end is if Museveni moves in decisively. Because what we're saying now, that, I mean, the point
what do you mean if Museveni moves in decisively?
Oh, I mean, he's been talking to both parties. He's been talking to both protagonists.
Is there any more decisively than that?
Well, he's not giving them clear instruction. The first instruction was sit down and negotiate, right?
Is that how a public university that has a vice chancellor and all that host of leadership should be run?
I mean, as Samji Brahimuganda has often said, that this country is under an occupation and the university is no exception.
And it is okay.
You can't say the university is exception, because, you know, the point that Arias made earlier about how if you're a journalist, you want professors to make comment about the ongoing demonstrations at Makerere, you may not get them, and it's not because they are tired of commenting on this thing without end. Partly, they are scared of their tenure. You know that Makerere University has the thing that if the moment you're seen in participating in any form of protest or demonstration against the university, you are summarily suspended or dismissed. And that means you don't get a salary. So it happens immediately. The moment you voice anything that seems contrary to what the management believes, the position is you are suspended immediately. So that is scare, but that's not the bigger part of the scare. The bigger part of the scare is that most of management is actually working hand in hand with Makerere University management, is working hand in hand with the state. You remember what happened earlier this year? We had an industrial action by Mwasa.
When there was communion, the rest was suspended.
And you know what happened was that we actually have a garrison at Makerere University. We have a camp of the military seated in Makerere. And one of the most eloquent professors at Makerere argued that the university was taken over by regime-change intellectuals. Basically to say, Mr. Museveni, you have a bunch of professors here who believe they want to change your regime. So one of the ways you can deal with them is by pitching camp here and dealing with them decisively. So, you know, and you know the dismissals that happen. So like the top management, the top intelligence of the university working hand in hand with the state. Nawangwe, the list of the Professor Hisali, Magara, all these names have been mentioned as working hand in hand with the state. So the scare is at two levels. You're scared about your tenure, but also you have a political scare that if you're seen voicing your comment as a professor Makerere, it's really dangerous in the sense that you risk so much. You risk both at the political front, and you also risk at the livelihood front. So this really makes it difficult for us to predict quite succinctly how this is going to end.
Agatha, I really hope that Yusuf will be able to go back to the university tomorrow, given the statement he has made. But
he has made good statements, and I want you to comment on that first.
Just to add on what Yusuf...
I want you to comment on his suggestion that President Museveni should be involved more decisively, or like
as he has always
address
done.
The question.
But you see, that's exactly what I told you at the beginning, that the university management are not in charge. There's somebody who is in charge, and once that person moves in decisively and says now the increment must stop, the strike will stop, because whoever is pushing this.
But how sustainable?
Let me tell you, the manner in which the university is governed was actually set by the manner in which the University Council was constituted. There was that debate about the caliber of people who were appointed to go in the University Council and the interest they will be serving. We had that discussion some time back,
yes,
and it was all over the media. So whatever is happening now is just following a blueprint that has been set. But Let me talk about what Yusuf here hinted about. I had a discussion with one of the key players, I think, in the management at the university. I'm sorry, I wouldn't reveal the name, but so I was actually trying to ask him why, for instance, the university staff are silent. Mwasa is silent. The professors are silent. There's only one professor that I saw. I don't know whether it was actually true. The one who had hinted that he will not be teaching unless the army leaves the university. I don't know whether it's because I didn't see him speaking verbally. Maybe, you know, these days social media can also run around with things. But this gentleman that I spoke to actually told me, you people, what do you want us to do? The army has taken over the university.
This is the lecturer.
This is the lecturer. And they said, did you see what they did to Parliament? What do you expect a mere university to do? So you can see, I think everybody at Makerere University has been beaten to the point that they must only focus on teaching. And even teaching is also becoming a problem because they can still also go after you, looking at what happened to Deus and the like. So everybody has sort of given up, and the vibrancy that used to be at Makerere University, because it was a center of debate that would shape the affairs of this country. We used to see people in Makerere submitting statements on pieces of legislation in the House, providing policy alternatives. All these have gone into shambles.
Eliasa, I would like to hear your comment on the decisiveness that Museveni has not yet shown, and how sustainable is that Museveni is going to come and make a call and say, stop, don't increase the fees
for my bazukuru,
and it will stop today, but tomorrow we will be dealing with the same problem.
I think Yusuf was being realistic. You are inviting me to be idealistic about it. The issue is that for as long as Yoweri Museveni is in power, that is how he has structured the thing to work, and that is what will happen. When he says this must end, I think now, from what I've heard, the way they have been approaching it is, if you pay a lot of attention to Makerere University students or to the lecturers, they'll think they are very important. Ignore them. They'll get tired. There's a time when that was going on. But what Yusuf is saying is the realistic view, because was it 3 years ago, 2016?
Yes.
When Yoweri just
closed the university.
said we shut it down.
Actually,
Because
the anniversary, the 2-year anniversary was yesterday.
You're going to destroy things. He could have shut it down. But I think, does he see opportunities to milk it for political gain or something? I don't know.
It's a
I was
possibility.
speaking to a student, I mean a parent who's very worried because his child was at university at that time when it was shut down, and then said, okay, now they left, I had to pay hostel fees again when she went back. And I mean, it is very, very painful. And for those who are paying, you clearly feel it. But very quickly, I wanted to go back to that issue I raised, that what's happening at Makerere, it is not just fees. Very, very many matters should be read together. I met there's a gentleman there, Professor Mwavu, I'll mention him. He's the deputy
Mwasa.
Yeah, chairperson of Mwasa. He was in court. He actually managed to secure an injunction restraining Professor Nawangwe and his administration from acting on him. And why did they want to act? They were asking him to explain, why did you make public comments? Comments in public about the university and those are the grounds on which they best to suspend Professor Kamunyu, is it? Yeah, the chairperson of Mwasa.
Kamunyu.
But now you are talking about somebody who leads a labor union, which is legal, making comments in his capacity as the deputy
president.
Yeah, president of Mwasa or whatever they call it. And you say, now you have to explain as a lecturer. I saw that very recently. So I would very clearly understand why many Yusuf's colleagues keep telling us, you see, I can't say this, I can't say that. And when that is happening at a place that was once known for ideas contending, if I think otherwise, it doesn't matter what the Vice Chancellor thinks, there's nothing he can do to me, whatever. It has so changed that that is where we are. So it is very difficult now to imagine that other things will be managed differently.
Areas on that. The story of Dr. Stella Nyanzi is a definitive story of our time and the life that Makerere has taken. If you remember in 2016, when Stella Nyanzi undressed in protest against the unfairness that he was meeting from the MISA director, Mahmoud Mamdani, ideally Mamdani was wrong because Stella Nyanzi tried to seek redress through the structure of the university. But that's not the story. The story is after the house went down. Stella Nyanzi was undressed and the story is big in the news. Mamdani has to explain himself. The Vice Chancellor then got a phone call from the president asking him for two things. Because remember, in the period that followed, Mahmoud's contract was expired, and he had to stand up because he was also over the age where Makerere can employ somebody who is over 70. So this is what happened. The VC, Professor Dumba, received a phone call from the president demanding for two things: suspension of Stella Nyanzi and awarding Mamdani another 5 years. Right? Two things from the president. So Stella Nyanzi is suspended, partly because also Stella Nyanzi became really more political, and you know the case that he had against Makerere University, suspending him for making political comments against the First Lady. You know that it also came in thereafter, and he sued court on that. But and that he was victorious on that one. But she's never been recent to Makerere. But if the president has the courage and the leeway to make a phone call to the university to say, subverting all structures of the university, to say, I want you to do two things: suspend the lady and appoint the professor. Give him 5 more years, even when he's over age. That is where we've reached. Even under these circumstances, the president is potentially suited to do that, and change will happen.
Okay, we'll stay on the Makerere story, but this time on a story that is close to our hearts as journalists. And this is not a new story we have seen.
Makerere is also very close to our hearts.
Yes, yes, Makerere is also very close to our hearts. But it's very unfortunate and sad that every time journalists try to do their work, and not once, not twice, it has been something that has now become normal for the army and the police to find them and treat them as rebels that they are facing. And in last year but one, the NGO for Rights of Journalists, HRNJ, put cases that were reported of journalists being brutally beaten and assaulted, and their equipment damaged at 113 cases. And all those cases, they are never addressed. I think the latest is Jimmy Akena. That was the biggest story during the Bobi Wine protests. And now in Makerere, we saw the brutal treatment of Esagara and this guy Chitata from Vision Group and Tracy, and we are reminded of a journalist that was beaten and has remained permanently crippled by Joram Mwesige. Was that police officer called Joram Mwesige?
Yeah,
and we are asking ourselves, and especially you, Muchibi, who has a platform for media freedom, how can we change this, and what can journalists do, or any other stakeholders, to change this culture that is becoming a real problem?
Very difficult question, that. How can we? I don't know whether we can change it, because I know for certain, unless a number of things change, when there are protests and journalists go to cover them, especially photojournalists and videographers, they'll be beaten up by security agents. I don't want to call them police, because much of the time it is not actually the police. Like in Makerere, wherever, it's usually the army. And
even Jimmy Akena, it was the army. Yes.
Yeah. Why they do that is because ordinarily Ugandans should be free to demonstrate if they find cause for that, and they feel they have exhausted all the other options. So you are talking about people who are not necessarily breaking the law, demonstrating their anger towards the state or whatever agency it is. And that is a universally accepted right. anywhere in the world if you pretend to be a democracy. But now you have here security forces being deployed to quell the demonstrations. And journalists are calling, we have a duty to report what we see for the public to understand exactly what's happening. People dressed in security uniforms are actually paid and act for the public. So as a journalist, I have a duty to report what they do, especially regarding the public. That is where the problem is, that you go, especially photojournalists, because if I go and write that so and so, if that former DPC of what Kampala you referred to had just been reported in words to have beaten up Rwanga, the former videographer, it would be different. The police can come with all force and argue it did not happen. It's difficult. You can't argue with a picture. You can't argue with a video. So that is why, many journalists I work with or I send out in the field, I never allow them to go with any illusions as to whether they will be attacked or whatever. So safety, many times when these things happen, then the police or the army will come out and say, see, this did not happen and all that. But that's different from what we see as the practice. And one thing I would suggest that we need to do, we need to put pressure on the security agencies, particularly the police, to disclose their rules of engagement. When you send out, let's say there's a protest in Makerere, as a journalist or as the public or even the demonstrators, they should know what the police officers deployed to handle that protest can do, are allowed to do, or may not do. And that is very difficult. We are talking about just journalists, but also members of the public. You may not go just because you're an army officer or a soldier, a policeman, and you just beat up people because they are demonstrating. And you are not a court of law that has convicted this person, and therefore you're supposed to subject them to corporal punishment. I don't know whether it's still allowed.
No, it is not.
So all these arguments, I think the key issue is that the state has decided there will not be demonstrations, whether genuine, whether legal or not. And for as long as they maintain that stance, it is very difficult for us journalists, because you go there and if you take note, you're talking about Akena. I think Akena is an amazing photojournalist. That's why he's been there for a very long time. You're talking about Escalation now. I think last year he was the overall award winner for photojournalists and whatever. You may talk about a number of journalists. I usually work with Abulu Boa, especially when I was in the field, and we covered a lot of political protests and whatever. And many times I would take it upon myself to tell him, I don't think it is safe anymore for you to be here. And you'd see guys, because they'll come and it is specifically targeted. They know that this person will not do this and whatever. If they don't destroy the camera, then they may attack the person.
Okay, Kenneth, I would like to get your views. We have a constitution that guarantees the right of the press, freedom of the press and expression. We have a Press and Journalists Act that also guarantees that right to publish and disseminate information. And we have the NIJU. Where did it go? The Media Council. All those are supposed to come in and arbitrate between those sorts of tensions between the journalists and the state. What is not working? Where should we focus the attention to bring an end to this?
Well, Agatha, while you narrate all that we have, the fact of the matter is there is a narrative that the freedom of the press that we enjoy today was probably one of the things which was brought by the 1986 liberation. That's the narrative that seems to be trending these days. And he who gives has the right to take away. That seems to be the situation. But let me probably bring in this. The Human Rights Network for Journalists, an organization that I'm proud to be one of the founders, has documented for the 10th time the police and army as the lead violators of journalists in Uganda. Have you seen anything being done about it? Nothing. And if you look at the trend, experts will tell you that the media, the state of the media in a given country is a reflection of how things are on the democratic front. So if you have a media that is more interested in mirroring what is happening on the political scene, and the people who are in charge do not want that kind of situation to be given out to the public, like Area Saya is saying, of course they will target those that are most likely to bring out that picture. And that's the reason why journalists are being beaten. Because clearly, most journalists go in the field to cover such conflict situations when they are clearly marked as press. I'll give you an example of Akena. He had all these huge cameras. He had his jacket, and he kept on shouting and saying, "I'm a journalist," but they clobbered him, not once, not twice, but several times. They actually ganged up and beat him to the point where he's now confined in a wheelchair. We saw what was happening in Makerere. One of the journalists, Damali of KFM, was actually shouting and telling the police, "We are all journalists, don't beat us. If you want to arrest people, please, you have to take all of us." Then you saw the reporters of NTV. They had the jackets. Clearly, you could see that this is a journalist. But they were still clobbered. And there is one funny incident that happened when there was this photo exhibition around the railway grounds, when they were actually pointed out the best photographer, which is Lubowa, that he was talking about. Lubowa took a series of pictures about police brutality, and they were and actually they are the reasons he won the award this year as the best photojournalist. But actually, as the photos were being hung there for the people to see, the police came and actually said, "Take these ones away. We don't want these images here." You can imagine just mere pictures of the police actually doing what they're doing. So there is that narrative that actually people should not see what's happening. And if it's the journalists who are going to do that, then you have to stop them. But there is one big issue that we need to address actually. As the journalists continue to be beaten, we have seen, of course, statements coming out from human rights organizations and so forth. But the National Association of Broadcasters, the media owners, have been silent. And actually, I think the biggest battle we have is with the media owners.
Okay, we'll come
when it comes to all aspects that journalists are going through.
Media owners, when we are talking about the boycott that the journalists have announced. But now I want Yusuf to come in and tell us, how can journalists do their duty of informing and disseminating information to Ugandans without their lives being at risk? You now send a journalist and keep thinking, "I've sent him to a battlefield, will he come back or will she come back?" What can be done about it?
Well, there's nothing to do. The journalists just have to brace themselves for more to come, right? I mean, there's nothing to do, even the boycott. I don't know how much victory is extra from boycott, but there's nothing to do. You just have to be ready for the worst that is yet to come. And historically,
how do we get ready?
Historically, the state and media have often been at crossroads historically. When you look back at the American war in Vietnam in the 1960s, the Americans are recorded to have lost the war. But when one of the officials asked whether they actually lost the war, he said they didn't lose the war at the battlefront, but they lost the war in the American media. That they allowed the American media to report the war as was actually happening. And that's where they lost the war. They would have contained the American media from the ways in which it was reporting the war. So if you're fighting in this country, if you're fighting against abuse against the general public, if you're fighting the ways in which the state is beating up protesters at Makerere University, if you're reporting people protesting rent in Kampala, if you're reporting, if the government is beating up people protesting, say, doing the walk to work or on these defiance campaigns, even those protests will have to be treated the same way. Because what you're doing is you're generating anger. Because the idea of a protest is to generate anger. Is generate anger in the community so that they can rise up. All right? Now, one of the ways of generating massive anger is by reporting it. So the media has to be ready that it is going to happen. The people that you're reporting about see you. The state is intervening against people that those who are involved in the protest and those who are reporting the protest as one and the same. And the moment you understand that, the media will have to really brace themselves for worse. I don't see it stopping because, you know, first of all, this government is aware that one of the ways in which it can be taken, I've said this over and over again, I'm going to really sound repetitive, that one of the ways, the only way they can be challenged, that Museveni's grip on power can be challenged, the only way, there isn't one way, just it's not being worked on, is through protests, be they by student protests or by protests throughout Kampala, throughout the city. That's the only way. This election nonsense doesn't work. Let me finish this train, Agatha. So, in the moment that you're generating mass discontent through protests, and there's somebody who's there to report it and display it to the world, that is dangerous in itself. In fact, you're even more dangerous than the people who are actually protesting. So the media has to be ready for worse. As it happened, James Isabide, the guy that you report about here in TV, his crime, the disabled fellow, his crime was using his phone to record the beatings on the at Lumumba Hall. That is how they saw a camera. That's how they saw somebody recording from his hall, and they moved to his room and beat him up.
Let's get back to that point after the short commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back from that commercial break. Thank you for staying with us. And we are still on the issue of journalists and the police. And Yusuf is saying that we either go out and die or decide not to cover any stories because there's nothing that can be done about it. But there is what journalists are trying to do about it, and they have announced a boycott of police activities. They started with refusing to record Colin Amaye, the deputy spokesperson of police, at the UNEB press briefing. And we would like to ask these gentlemen here how effective that will be in as far as resolving this issue, and also how sustainable is it, considering that us journalists, we don't own these media houses. They can decide to do a Makerere and say, if you don't want to work, you leave, we bring in people that want to work. And being an editor, I'm going to start with you, Muchiv. Please tell us how do you see this boycott helping us resolve this threat?
Thank you. If you may just allow me quickly respond to an issue raised about media owners, especially particularly broadcasters, whatever, who
I had actually not made that point clear.
You hadn't made it clear.
But you can carry on.
Yeah, but it appeared to me that you feel they are silent as journalists are being brutalized. Whatever. And I just wanted to underscore the issue that it seems to me that this is a political matter. And many of the media owners are politicians, many of them business people. Whatever they are, whether politicians or businessmen, they have to survive. And what is happening now is they have a very big trade-off to make. You are talking about a government that decided people will not demonstrate. And I just wanted to tell you a very quick story about one of the last stories I covered. That was shortly after the 2016 election. Kizza Besigye was locked up in his house. The police couldn't let him. So we go there to talk to him, and there were police people who rounded us up and took us to Kalangala Police station now. And there we met the late Andrew Felix Kawes, a very conversational guy, very free, and he tells us, you see, you people, those guys have their problems. There is a lot of news all over the place. I mean, they could have beaten you there, but I don't think the police should be doing that. What the police should be doing is, we should be discussing this. You leave the stories that are supposed to be left, because a few bad things could happen there, and you don't want to be witness. But we are journalists. I mean, journalists report on war, on everything. So to me, that conversation with Kawes at Kasangat police station just clarified to me how these guys approach it. I think they put us in that van, the so-called best van. They took us there. They told us, you are not under detention. You just sit there, whatever. But I just want to ask you.
And that is not detention.
Don't even think about going back. Just go to your offices. You are free people. But our job is to ensure that we get the news that the public want, and we cannot do that unless we go to those
So how far can the boycott announced?
You're talking about the boycott. I don't know whether a boycott is a good or bad thing. But one thing I always tell journalists, colleagues, is we definitely cannot run away from reporting on the police, on the army, on all security agencies. Because if I'd like to use a parallel, the Western world usually liked it very much. Whenever they thought this is a rogue regime, they say we will slap sanctions. They sanction the country, so they make sure that they starve the country of resources. And I think they have now been walking away from it, having realized that in the end it is the people who suffer because the leaders have stockpiled enough and they can get a few other avenues. If you're talking about boycotting the police, yes, if the police spokesperson is saying something at their headquarters about whatever, we may not need to go there. But there are going to be activities that the police carry out, including currently quelling the protests at Makerere. We definitely must go there. And I don't know whether the police will then say that you people are boycotting our activities and therefore you cannot come here. I don't know. I mean, it's a discussion that usually comes about. I know that many people engage with the police when journalists are threatened, when journalists are beaten. I know that the police, and especially the army, usually come out and they say, after roughing you up, then they want to come to you individually and they say, you see, but we can pay your bills. We can also replace your camera and whatever. That has happened to so many people. So the serious issue of, first of all, blocking journalists from doing their work and therefore denying the public the right to know is not addressed. What is addressed then, they'll tell you, we can cause damage to you, but we can repair it and make you cushion a bit. So this boycott issue, I don't know, and I don't know for how long it will continue. And because the other big problem we have is a proliferation of media houses. The cost of publication has been cut dramatically because now you can just put up a website at a appreciable fee and you start publishing and you call yourself a newspaper or news website. And many of the media houses, if you can call them that, we have in this country, are going to be known to be very bothered by what is going to happen if you boycott the police or whatever. So the police will very certainly get avenues to get its propaganda out. And I don't know if it would be of benefit to us to boycott them, because then that denies us the perspective and the access to get one or two things from them and maybe balance up this or have this clarified or even put the hard questions. So the dilemma to me is, do we stay? And that is what I think. We stay and make sure that these questions are clarified. We put them. Where they are not answered, we say this A, B, C, D has not been answered. Because at the end of the day, we are just players helping in the process of recording history.
But these questions have not been clarified for so many years. And let me go to Kenneth.
Clarified for so many years, if you can allow me a minute, I tell you that they are clarified in so many stockpiles of newspapers that have been published.
No, I mean, I
that
thought
you
you
can go back
meant dialogue with the police to clarify.
You can go back and read them 20 years later. I don't know what that policeman will think if he has a picture now and a grandfather who we can now talk about after 20 years and say, as published in Monitor, this is what he did.
Okay, so Kenneth, we know that as journalists, we really have little say on what we cover. We have our editors, we have the media owners hovering over us. How do you see this working, the boycott, if they decide to go the boycott way like the Uja president announced? How sustainable can it be?
Number one, as journalists, we are equally divided. We are equally divided. Sometimes you wonder whether we are serious at all. When the Uja president made the announcement.
Uja, for the benefit of our viewers, is the Uganda Journalists Association, and it is headed by Bashir Kaziwe now.
Which also has...
who is the one who announced the boycott and is saying that until the police resolves our issues, we are not going to cover the police.
So as journalists, we are deeply divided, and as you can see, leadership matters have also been left to the leadership, and the talking aspect, the advocacy on the rights of the journalists has been left to a few people. And for instance, it would make more sense if we had the League of Editors speaking out, but the same editors are the ones who are going to send the journalists tomorrow to the police press conference at Naguru. And I can assure you the press conference will be there. But also, I think the police, we targeting the police may not be the solution at all, because I think the police are also implementing a certain narrative that we discussed much earlier, that this is what must happen. If there is anything like this going on, journalists trying to portray this and this image, this is what should happen. Like Elias was telling you here, the late Andrew Felix Kulaije called Kawesi called them and said, there is news elsewhere. Why are you preoccupied with this aspect? Leave this story. Go and cover another story. There's a lot of other things you can do.
Yes.
And of course, the pressure on media houses will ultimately be communicated by the legitimate authorities like UCC. The police do not have to stand up and say you have to cover us on what. UCC will work. There are mechanisms to enforce this. And you know, like I told you, the media owners, they are equally divided. You remember the other time when there was this meeting at UCC, the only lone voice there was of the Honorable Francis Babu, who actually stood up and spoke truth to power and told you, UCC, you are going beyond your limits. So the media owners are equally divided. They are not supportive. And in fact, you raised the question and says, and it is areas here who actually said that they are caught in between. They have a lot of compromise to make. For instance, they are looking for business. But really, to the extent that they beat up one of your foot soldiers in the field, there is blood oozing out. You are ultimately, as a media outlet, going to face the bills of taking care of these journalists, if there is that kind of provision in most of the media houses, which I also think doesn't exist in many media houses. You know, you have to stand up, because this is a direct attack on your establishment. But then there is that disconnect between the journalists, the media owners, and the people who are actually supposed to be making the advocacy.
Before I come to you, Yusuf, let's play the video of Kaziwe telling us, the president of the Uganda Journalists Association, talking about the boycott and the plans for next week.
In effect, from today, the Ugandan media fraternity is called upon not to report anything to do with the police. We really believe that in so doing, it's going to help us send a message, and a clear message at that, to the police institution and to the government at large, that the media is no longer giving lip services to the meting out of crimes against us, because a number of our colleagues have beaten, cameras are confiscated, and the general working environment of the media is not safe and free in regards to how we deal with the police. Much as we want a dialogue, but it's not coming forth. Yeah. And in moving forward, on Monday, we are calling upon all the journalists in the country to join us as we petition the Uganda police at the police headquarters. At 9 a.m. we shall be assembling somewhere, then we move to the police headquarters to petition the IGP.
Bashir Kazwe, the president of Uganda Journalists Association, and I can see Kenneth has a lot itching to say something.
I just want to ask a question. Will that petitioning process not be covered?
But Kenneth, let's hear what Yusuf has to say about...
I mean, the boycott has to be internal. The boycott cannot be external. The boycott has to be inside the media houses. You boycott against your boss. Journalists, because you know the disconnect that has been spoken about, the disconnect between journalists and the media owners. The starting point, the boycott has to be internal. Why are media houses not standing up for their journalists? Where is Maria Chwanuka for the Radio 1 person? Where is Maria Chwanuka speaking up?
At least she has stood up in the past when there
well,
such
she
incidents.
doesn't have to stop because these things are continuing. Where is Robert Kapshinga standing up for his journalists at the NV being battered? Where is Arias Isaiah, but where is the Aga Khan? Or Daniel Kalinaki? Why are they not? Where is Charles Michachi? These are the journalists who are like sort of running these media houses. Where is Andrew Mwenda? Andrew Mwenda has to stand up and speak against the battering of journalists. Where is Ken Karisa? Has he spoken about against the batter of journalists? The boycott has to be internal, because if it is internal, you challenge the media owners to stand up, because if media is a business, if they run their houses as businesses and they profit from doing business in this country, they have to be held accountable for the people who work for them. So those who work for them has to have an internal boycott against your bosses, because your bosses have a bigger stake in this industry. And because they are more senior than many of the journalists. I mean, look at the journalists, they are hungry and famished and underpaid, running around looking for this story and being battered in the process. These guys have money and have the voice to stand up and speak to those who hold power in this country and say, you have to protect those who work for us. They are doing the... I mean, Francis Babu said last time, you're making media houses, local media houses, look like idiots. When the stories are being covered all over the international media and they're not being covered internally, you make them look like idiots, right? So when Babu, as a lone voice, spoke up against Mtabazi's UCC, all of them have to stand up and speak. So I would challenge the journalists that the boycott has to be internal. Here at NTV, if you're battered, well, but this is speaking to structured media houses, like, you know, you have NTV, you have NBS and Monitor, these like have structures. How about the freelancers? Right, we have majority of journalists in this country, they're freelancers, right? In the houses to which they sell their stories, have to stand up for them. Otherwise, like, you know, the question you ask, where are the senior editors? You look at Bashir Kazwe, who's the president, he's a junior journalist, far junior than the panel here. Why are we guys not heading UJA, right? Why have the senior journalists abandoned UJA? Yet, here's the thing, here's the fun part. They have not left the industry. Where is Acme, for example? Acme has made so much money from being the African Center for Media Excellency. Where are they? Why are they not doing this protest? I can tell you the senior stakeholders who are profiting from this industry have taken a back seat, and I think that's more danger. I would challenge the media houses, the journalists, the junior journalists. The protest has been internal. Stand up against your bosses. They have to speak for you because they have money, they have resources, and their voice is louder.
Okay, I am going to allow the journalists here who disagree with you on many things from what I say to respond to that, especially Mchibi, who is one of the bosses. So Mchibi, what's your take on what Yusuf is saying?
I don't want to disagree with Yusuf on anything, just to clarify one or two things.
That you're not the boss.
No, that's not important. I think what is important is if you read Monitor, there is a section, it's usually page 12, where they put the editorial. That is where the management of the newspaper, on behalf of the owners, speaks. And
you have spoken.
We had a very bold editorial about the same. And I think that newspaper usually stands out to fight for rights, including for our journalists. But I think that is a small matter. The most important thing is that you're saying that media houses, the owners and the people running them, are not collectively speaking up. I don't want to disagree with you on that. I just want to add that journalism, it may be a business for some people who have set up a newspaper or a radio station, a TV station, but it is a service to society. And no society can be better than its journalism. If, as you call upon people from media houses to do whatever, why, what about parliament? What about academics? What about everyone? Yes. What about the entire country saying this cannot happen?
But because the first line of defense are those who are directly profiting.
Because what I'm talking about, directly profiting, you're talking about, you're reducing it to something very small and pecuniary.
And first line of defense
and pecuniary.
And areas.
What I'm talking about here is, we are talking about a society where we have now what I can call an endemic governance problem. And the governance deficit is now manifest in how journalists will be treated. At the start of this show, earlier I said that actually we shouldn't just be discussing journalists being battered during protests. We should be talking about Ugandans. No one who is given a baton and a gun and tear gas and whatever should brutalize a citizen just because that citizen has maybe stood up to say, I disagree with this, and they have perhaps not broken any law. I think that is important. I think we can win better if we say that this is a serious problem. It's a problem of politics. It's a problem of managing society. We are supposed to have minimum standards as to what somebody who wears police uniform can do and cannot do. And that cannot be done by just people who own media houses. For some reasons I hinted on, and he's talking about it, because the state has repressive, institutions. He has been talking about UCC. You can talk about even URA. They can use the Uganda Revenue Authority as an institution to repress.
But yes, there's something you're sidestepping, and I want to hold this with you. Because we are already in a state of war, and the journalists in their boycott are trying to step up their activism against the repression of the state. The state is ever repressive. That's a given about the state.
And Yusuf,
why is the advocacy left on the journalists?
And Yusuf,
I want to hear us speak to this.
Just one last comment. I'm telling you,
why is the advocacy left?
That boycott will not work out if the media owners in this country, and let me look in the camera and tell them that while you think that this is a problem for journalists, it's just actually a problem for your media entities. Because once they go after the journalist and the journalist is beaten, it's at the end of the day, you, the individual media owners, are the ones who are going to suffer. So if the media owners do not stand up, we are wasting time with the boycott.
And just a comment in the editorial section of the newspaper doesn't really count in this context. We are in a context of war. Media houses have to up their advocacy. The actions has to be up, because a repressive state is really coming hard on you, and you're just putting out a comment. There has to be action. My question to you, Ariasa, is why is the activism left to journalists? If you say, why don't the owners come up and put a voice together?
Have to leave this topic.
And up this activism.
But before we do, I want to agree with Ariasa, what he said about the threat is not just of journalists, but Ugandans. And I'd like production to play for us, to show us James Sebide that we referred to earlier. And Yusuf tells us that that his plight came from him trying to film a video to get a video of the police and the army ransacking students' halls. If we have that, so that we show our viewers, Sebide.
Ordinarily, James Sebide, a student of Makerere University living with a disability, would not be the victim of a protest against a planned increment in tuition. His tuition at Makerere University is paid for by the government under the disabilities scheme. But just like the leader of the protests, Superior Molly Sasidabo, he appreciates the strain that his colleagues had been going through to pay their way through a university education. with plenty of emotion and pain. He recalls last Thursday night when the military raided his hall of residence, Lumumba, where they proceeded to smash their way into the rooms, beating anyone they found with a special level of ruthlessness. James Sebide says on that fateful Thursday, he was lying on his bed watching television when he heard the military officers forcefully breaking in. He says they pounced on him, battering him all over his body. He says the officers never listened to his pleas that he was a person living with a disability and had not been involved in the protests.
They broke into my room, they caned me, the arm, even the back and the leg. Now I'm feeling a lot of pain all over the body, most especially the chest, because when I'm walking, my effort I use the chest when I'm walking.
Sebide is fortunate that his parents were watching NTV on that night as these pictures came through. They would later come to collect him, taking him to a clinic for treatment for a dislocated arm and leg. Later, he would become more disappointed when he recorded a case with Makerere University police station. To his surprise, the police station elected to record the matter as a case of theft of property by unknown people. The constables declined to mention his physical assault and property damage.
I reported my case to the Makerere police station, but they have not responded. They told me, the army guys, they cannot do anything wrong. They cannot do anything wrong and they cannot take anything of yours.
Sebide now survives on the mercy of his friends and family who help him with personal hygiene, movement and room service. Lawrence Kasozi, his fellow resident at Lumumba Hall, is one such good Samaritan.
Sebide could help himself like somewhere, somehow. But right now, I'm currently staying with him. I shower him, I help him move, I help him get what to eat. Like almost, I'm doing everything socially to him.
Asked whether he would like to prefer legal charges against the army for his pain, Sebide says he focuses on getting better. He says his parents have already spent much more on medical bills and worries about the cost implications of demanding justice.
So far spent on my treatment bill, 1.05 million being provided by my parents. Just like I'm poor, even my parents are poor, but we don't have money to go to court.
This follows reports that the Uganda People's Defense Forces has since arrested Captain Richard Lubera, the military officer who was in charge of the troops that raided the residential halls, battering the students.
That is the sad story of James Sebide, a student with disability at Makerere University, that the police couldn't even see his condition, and that's why I want to give each of you 1 minute to talk about, to wrap up here, and especially the police. What do we do? The journalists, the Ugandans, like Muchibi put it, that this is not a problem of just journalists, and we know that. What can we as journalists do in helping this cause to fight against this brutality? Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I just needed to inform Yusuf. There are efforts actually to set up something called the Editors Guild.
Long overdue. But seems like that was
laughing about it. But I mean, there are so many associations. The Editors Guild will add to that. You have just you have referred to Uja already, and you know how infiltrated it can get, how difficult it can get to get elected. Yeah? You go, at some point there was an election here, KCC offices, and journalists were locked out. People are suspected to be borders, whatever. All of a sudden had IDs. They went in and voted in a regime supporter as the...
Caucus was a regime supporter?
No, that was before then.
Previous.
The previous president.
Even Bashir's election was also contested to the extent that people were saying, let's start a parallel one. I was part of that, and I thought maybe it wouldn't make sense. So the important thing is, it is very difficult to organize. It is not just difficult to organize journalists, it's difficult if you know what Kasita used to do and what they do now, and whatever, it is like a mirror of society, because I think the state actively works all the time to ensure that there are no organized societies that may be alternative centers of power, whatever, however small that power may be or whatever. I think that is an important point for us to make if we are trying to apportion blame as to who should be fixing this or how they should do it and whatever. Everyone at their level seems to be targeted in a way and whatever. So in conclusion, as I said, it is the politics.
And Kenneth, what's your last?
Well, my last take would be to just tell all Ugandans that there is brutality happening, and at the moment it could be happening to only a section of a few people in this country. My biggest fear is that if this is left unabated, if Ugandans do not rise up, for instance, to speak on behalf of the media that actually does serve them, to speak on behalf of the leaders who are aspiring to lead them, then at the end of the day, this violence will become problematic and the entire country will be affected. And I want also to agree with Arias that it's a big governance problem, and all the indicators show that whatever is happening is connected with our politics, and something that I've always argued about, that the nature of politics that is playing out in our country is not really very good. We need to go back and reflect that this country at the end of the day belongs to all of us.
Yusuf?
You know, if media houses are not going to close shop all of a sudden and go packing because of the politics, I think something has to be done. And in the face of autocracy, if you're to continue the political line, in the face of autocracy, the response is always more and more activism. That activism has to be heightened more and more. The Uja people, by calling a boycott, are trying to put the activism on the notch higher. Everybody has to come in, and I'm saying that the owners of the owners of capital, the owners of the media houses have to be involved, because their loss is more direct, as is their benefit. So, but the story that you just played on the picture that just ran of James Sebide, I can imagine his parents choking when they saw the pictures of their son being battered by security, a son who is disabled, and his crime being used his camera to report what was happening. I think that's very sad, and I hope that there are public interest lawyers out there who be interested in pursuing his case pro bono, because even his equipment in his room were destroyed.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. We haven't had time. I wanted to comment a little bit about ACME. You raised the issue of ACME. I think every player is doing their part. You're saying they are getting a lot of money from this. That I don't know, but I know that they are. Even on Friday, they held. Were you there? They are training journalists on how to work amidst this animosity, and I think they are doing a good job. And
training just how to work when they're being battered?
Yes. Everyone fights the best way they can. They fight with the means
but
they can.
We know there's a way they can take on this. Okay, they don't have guns, but they can. Let ACME lead a demonstration outside the city. You're really exonerating them from nothing.
I think Yusuf's point was
we
concerted efforts.
Exactly.
Every stakeholder should stand up, because
all get the point.
The brutality is just
you
going
mean they
too
just
far.
been battered because of their inexperience or incompetence reporting stories?
Okay. We are going to raise that with the media bosses, with the ACME,
There's
with
HRNJ. Because the benefit is more direct.
Thank you very much, production, for putting together this show. Thank you to you, our viewers, for staying up all night to watch us. And from us, it's a good night. We will be taking your views from our social media platforms. We are unable to take them live now, but thank you very much. And it's a good night. See you next week.